ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Battlechat. And this is Battlechat number 107, recording in both audio and video, we hope, on Tuesday, the 19th of December. That little quip is because we've got in like about a minute or two into this recording, and I suddenly thought, is the video switched on? And so I had to go out and check. Fortunately, my guest is professional to the nth degree, a pro to the core, didn't bat an eyelid because he does this kind of thing himself, and so he knows what it can be like, particularly when you're tired. Why am I tired? I got a couple of hours sleep last night, but I had a very long night making sure that at long last, after 10 years, Shot, Steel and Stone has become a thing in itself. My horse and musket rule set that appeared first in the Wargaming Compendium, which is, can you believe it, 10 years ago now, but which of course has been played to death since then, and play tested to destruction by people like all the guys who go to the 8 and weekend events. I think it's reassuring, because if it was going to break, it would have broken under those circumstances, particularly when adding the colonial rules and people start asking you for flaming pigs. Which, by the way, I can tell you, I've made a note inside Shots in the Zone. That really was a thing, dating back as far ago as kind of ancient Greeks and beyond. Someone figured out that if you, I mean, the poor animal doesn't bear thinking about, but if you cover a pig with lard or something and set it afire and point it in the general direction of the enemy, the poor beast in its death throes causes a tad of consternation, and particularly amongst elephants. There we are. So the perfect counter to enemy elephants is flaming pigs, and they're in the rules, folks. But there you go. So all that kind of thing, all that depth of research has finally been condensed into what I've called the basics. I've decided, contrary to the normal thing of everyone doing a rule set that's like full color hardback, loads of color pictures, loads of fluff, and probably a price tag of what, 30, 35, 40 pounds nowadays, I decided, what can I get out there for a tenner or thereabouts as a pre-Christmas thing for people? So there you go. It's don't look for lots of color and fluff. It's basically the rule set with a few black and white pictures and diagrams, and that's it. But there are links to other things, and I am going to be doing a series of YouTube walkthrough videos and that kind of stuff, because basically you can't sell a rule set these days unless you do that kind of thing, can you? Anyway, that's for another time, and I'll probably do another little special chat thing, off the cuff thing, just about that, because already the first people have bought the PDF. Lovely, thank you very much indeed, and have already started asking me questions. And literally, I need to have at least a couple of good nights sleep before I start answering those questions, so I will be coming back to that. Anyway, that's not why I'm here today. I'm here today really because I should have been here last week doing this. And my guest has been very patient, because I came down with a bit of a bug last week, a week ago today, when we were supposed to be recording this, and he very kindly agreed to shift things to today. But as I've already mentioned, this man, and he is a man, is renowned as someone who's taken it upon themselves to launch themselves into the vidcasting sphere. And he's not just done it, he's done it incredibly well. And those of you who know him will probably be regularly tuning into a sort of 10, 15-minute weekly videos on YouTube called Miniature Adventures. But I've known him, been bumping into him at wargame shows for, crikey, I can't remember how long. I think it was many, many years ago. I have a feeling it was the Cavalier show down in Tunbridge, actually. It may well have been. I first bumped into this chap. And his pals called the Postie's Rejects. Well, if you haven't guessed by now, you never will. So what can I say? Welcome to the show, Lee Hadley. Hello, Lee.
Hi, thank you for having me. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, so have I, mate. So have I. And I hope
bumping into each other at shows. it's always a snatched conversation while we rush off to do other things. It'd be nice to actually
Yeah.
have a proper chat for a change.
I know that because this is one of the reasons I started doing this podcast, Lee. It's because exactly that. You go to all sorts of shows, and I've been going now since probably since about 2004, 2005, when I started properly going to war game shows on a fairly regular basis. And that's the thing. You're absolutely right. You see someone, and it's always, oh, hail fellow, well met, because either they're running a game or they're in the middle of, oh, I'm just doing some shopping here, or they're off to do something else. And oh God, I've been here. Where have you been, Henry? I've been here since 8 o'clock this morning and I'm just about to leave. So you're absolutely right. It's these little snatch conversations. And I don't know how many times we must have said something like, you must come on the show, Lee. But Lee, so thank you for getting here. And should be able to tell from the video and the photos. Look at Lee. He's got that wonderful, highly professional Big Lee Miniature Adventures on his shirt there. Very smart. And he's sitting in his, wow, I'm going to say excruciatingly tidy work painting little library area there,
Yeah, not
which
when you
people
look that
recognize.
side of the room.
Yeah, I know. It's carefully composed, isn't it? Like sort of, oh, I'm a bit messy behind me, so I'll move over a bit. But anyway, uh, this is your little studio. Of course, we're all used to seeing that on your videos now, Lee. You
Mm.
park yourself in the corner there, and I know you. Thank you very much indeed. I need to say for shifting my two heavyweight tomes to the top of end of your shelf there. That's really lovely of you.
Yeah.
God bless him. He's a
They let the
nice man.
counterbalance the big books on the other end.
So long as the whole thing doesn't come crashing down
No.
because of him, that'll be all right. Now, Lee, we know you as around the war game shows, and of course, we know you for your miniatures adventures videos and stuff. But I think it's probably true to say that not many people know much about the man behind the hobby, as it were, which is
Mm.
another reason why I've really been looking forward to getting you on the show. And you very kindly sort of sent me through yeah, a CV that wasn't at all brief and was actually fascinating. No, seriously, sent me through some fascinating notes. So I think it would be really nice if you, before we start talking about wargaming at all, give the folks a bit of a kind of resume, a bit of an autobiography about where you were born, where you grew up, kind of education you had, and I'm going to. There's a first class honours degree involved here, folks. Right? Not a lot of people know that, and of course your actual kind of the way you've earned a living and your career up to now, the point that I think you work for a charity. So
Mm.
tell us a bit about yourself, then, Lee.
Born and bred in Dagenham in East London. Um, Lived here all my life, still live here, and now working here. So not exactly adventurous. I haven't been anywhere else. Um, and standard education. Um, a late reader, as I think I put in my notes to you. I ended up having a special teacher back in the days when they'd bring someone in special to teach you to read. And as soon as I
Oh
was
wow!
off the ground and reading, I was always had a book in my hand. Um,
Yeah.
uh, when I went through sixth form, met my wife.
Oh, right. So
Yeah.
you've known her since then?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and w- went to university. I did a site called independent study, which basically meant I designed my own degree course. Um,
Oh, wow. So which
Plucking
university was this?
University of East London. Well, it was the
All right.
Polytechnic of East London back then, but it became the
Yeah, yeah.
University of East London just as I was graduating. Um, and it was the sort of course where you could pluck modules from other degrees. So I
Oh,
would do,
wow.
oh, that's an interesting lecture. That's relevant to what I'm doing. Or um, I had a chance to use the Department of Environment's own library, for instance. I'm not entirely sure they
Wow.
knew I was an undergraduate because at one point I could see the look of horror on their face when they suddenly realised I wasn't working for the DOE, and I had access to stuff I probably shouldn't have seen. Um,
Oh,
so,
fantastic.
so yes, I studied environmental politics. which is
Which is a fascinating title. Tell us about that then. So it's yeah, but kind of explain that, because I think that's like Lego bricking together two what people would think of two completely separate areas of study. So that sounds fascinating. Tell us a bit about that, Lee.
well, I was looking at, sort of like the regulatory system in the UK, and
Mm,
looking forward to changes that were gonna come on board. Um,
right.
and, I hasten to add, I've never used any of this knowledge ever since. I've never worked in this field. But it was a fascinating subject, and 30 odd
Yeah.
years later, it's very interesting to see a lot of that regulatory framework being unpicked, hence the
Yeah.
dirty water that we have to put up with in our rivers and so on
Yeah.
at the moment. But
Yeah.
it was very interesting because I got to meet a lot of different people. I did a bit of work for Friends of the Earth, and sort of
Oh wow.
volunteer for a while, which was a fascinating experience in itself, meeting
Mm,
some people with real experience. I think that was the point at which I suddenly realised that they weren't going to be hiring fresh faced graduates. They wanted
yeah.
scientists and people with real
Yeah.
experience. So it was a very
Yeah.
interesting working for them. Um,
Wow.
and uh, yeah, no, just a really interesting, a lot, because of the nature of the type of degree that I did, and the university at the time, uh, there was lots and lots of weird and wacky degrees being done. People were
Yeah.
going down rabbit holes with their own particular passions,
Mm,
so the people on the same course as me could be done studying everything from jewelry making through to engineering, but they were picking
mm.
their own subject, if you like. Um,
Wow.
and all obviously had to be authorised and approved,
Mm,
and you had a tutor to oversee it all. But a really
mm.
interesting way to do a degree, um, because frankly, I was an awful student at A level. I was too busy courting my wife, too busy uh,
Right.
going out and enjoying myself, and I muffed up
Yeah.
all my A levels. And I
Right.
had no idea how I got an unconditional offer from the university when I went for an interview, and I think it was just because I was
Right.
passionate about the subject that I wanted to study,
Right.
and I went in with a very clear idea of what I was going to do and where this course was going to lead.
Oh, right.
So I got an offer. I went there 3 years, met some really interesting people, like I say, doing really odd subjects, but very interesting.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, even to me, I did rather well at the end of it.
Rather well, a first class honours degree. They don't just give those away on a bus, you know.
If it
Crikey.
had something to do with my dissertation, which was as thick as one of your books, I think the requirement was for something like 10,000 to 15,000 words, and I ended up producing a 60,000 word dissertation that you could kill a cow with
Wow.
if you hit it,
Yeah, yeah.
because there was just so much to go into it. And as I say, I've never
Wow.
used any of that knowledge ever since. I've never worked in that field, but it's I always say this to people I've worked with since, and to my own kids. It wasn't so much the subject; it was the skills I learned there,
Yes,
because
of course.
you learn the art of researching and writing and crafting things
Yes.
and understanding the fine details of legal documents and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, Great grounding for the wargamer, uh, reading
Yeah,
through
absolutely.
reading through reams of government notes and the background to
Yeah,
acts of law and stuff like that.
yeah.
So yeah, very interesting, but I've never used it since.
Yeah, but then it took me how long did it take? 'Cause I took a history and languages degree, right?
Mm,
And I was at Sussex, and at that time, I had some very amenable tutors who could tell, "Oh, that Hyde, he's quite interested in military stuff, isn't he?" So they let me kind of tweak what the European history degree to just there's that revolutions. Now they're interesting. Oh, yeah. So I compared the armies of America and France. How revolutionary were the armies of America and France, in that period. And oh yes, English Civil War, and oh yes, a bit of the First World War and the Freikorps and all that sort of thing. So a bit like you, I was lucky that Sussex at the time was very kind of open to suggestions. But I think the point is well made, Lee, that it's we've been lucky enough to go to university and be able to study things that we're passionate about,
Mm,
whether or not that led to a career subsequently.
mm,
I'm sure I would have been much financially much better off if I'd done accountancy or something like that, or management studies, but it wasn't in my blood at the
mm.
time. Sadly, still isn't really. But it just learning how to learn. That's what it's all about,
Yeah.
isn't it, Lee?
And
And
and learning how to sell yourself, to be
yeah,
confident in what you've learned and the skills that you've picked up, and finding a way of translating that for whatever job you decided to go for. So,
yeah,
I've spent most of my life working in administrative type roles, a
yeah,
large chunk of that within the shipping and oil industry, um,
yeah,
and amazingly, the subject or the skills I'd learned were relevant. It was just a matter of me
yeah,
finding the relevance in the particular work that I was doing.
yeah.
Being able to understand complicated documents, or at least pick out the important elements.
Yes, yeah,
I spent a large amount of years working for a company that provided laboratory services to the oil industry, and
right.
every client, every different oil company that we worked with had a different contract, and so you had to read them all and pluck out the important information so that
Yeah,
you could build them correctly.
yeah,
And to a certain extent, that's the story of a wargamer, isn't it? Picking out the
yeah,
important information in a set of rules. But again, it's a skill I learned at university, being able to read stuff and take it in, and distill
yeah,
down out of all the fluff what's actually
yeah,
important,
absolutely.
useful. So
I think, Lee, what the fact is, however, we're all now going to have to call you Lee Greta Thunberg Hadley.
I'll get me ponytails out or something. I haven't got enough hair for that. Yeah,
No, mate, no. Got a few years on her
I,
as
I,
well, but
I,
but it is.
I do wish I'd studied a more history or gaming or something like that. I could have done anything. I mean, when
Yeah,
I look back on it, it was the type of degree course where I could have chosen any subject to study,
wow,
providing I could put together a course that met the requirements of the examining board. I could have
yeah,
studied anything, but they are
yeah.
hindsight.
But there's nothing to stop you now. I mean, this is you know, look at what I'm doing, self-publishing stuff, Lisa. If you're passionate about something nowadays, you can put together a piece of work and get it out there.
Yeah.
You don't have to go via gatekeepers anymore. I know that they like to think that you do, but you don't have to
Mm,
go through gatekeepers anymore. And you're amassing a body of work just doing your videos, which is fantastic.
yeah.
So anyway, kind of circling back to your career there, you kind of mentioned you've worked in kind of industries associated with the oil industry and shipping and that kind of notice. Was it P&O appears in your
Yeah,
CV there somewhere?
started out with P&O, went on and worked for some smaller oil transport companies, and that sort of led into a long period working for a laboratory services company associated with the oil industry, actually based on a
Right.
terminal, the sort of place
Oh,
where
right.
if you looked at something wrong, it would kill you. So it was a dangerous environment. Um,
Oh,
and this
right.
was all around the time of the big Buncefield fire,
Oh,
that
goodness.
terrible disaster, where thankfully no one was killed, but it was an enormous amount of disruption, and the whole industry
Mm,
became very paranoid about safety. So I was a bit involved with the safety side of things.
yeah.
For my team, I would buy all the equipment and
Mm,
go out on site inspections. Even went on to a few ships. But
right.
it was interesting work. It paid very well, but
Right.
at the end of the day, you were just a commodity. And when the time came, I was made redundant in the blink of an eye. Um, and
Really?
uh, it was that was the point at which I thought, "You know what, I'm going to do something completely different." Um,
Yeah.
and I a job came up with a charity based in my home borough. Um,
Mm.
I went, got the job, and I've been with them for nearly a decade now, and I love it.
Wow.
Love it. It's a completely different type of work. It's very flexible. The charitable sector it's always chasing little contracts. Um, Lots of local authorities farm out stuff that they used to do themselves.
Yeah.
So I work in the benefits team. So
Right.
some of my colleagues are doing benefit advice, helping people with form filling.
Oh.
Um, I'm currently in the third year of a project giving energy advice, which is happens
Oh,
to
right.
come at just the right time.
Wow.
um,
And, so what goes around comes around there, isn't it?
mm.
Since you were working for oil companies and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but it's all about domestic advice and helping
Yeah.
people with their bills, and the
Mm.
thing for me, the thing that makes it so much more rewarding is I'm working with people, my neighbours in effect, people in my home borough. Um,
Yeah.
Getting to visit them, they come to me sometimes, but
Mm.
it's a much more rewarding job, and not financially rewarding,
Yeah.
I hasten to add,
No,
but
no, I don't
from
imagine.
from a personal perspective, it's a much more enjoyable, and I work with a great team of people, and yeah, so that keeps me occupied during the day. But I hasten to add, they all know that I'm a gamer. I've not hid my gamer credentials for many a
Oh,
year, um,
well done.
and there's often an occasion where gamer skills or podcasting skills or whatever have come in handy at work, and I go, I know this because so I do.
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
yeah, brilliant.
yeah.
Oh, that's great, Lee. I mean, that must be really satisfying knowing that actually you're doing something that means something to people.
Mm,
Yeah. I mean, I've got I've got other friends who work in charities, and one is a senior social worker, and I think that's one thing I kind of admire is that you get the chance to actually make a difference to people's lives.
yeah.
That's a really important thing.
When
Well, that's
when I when I
fantastic.
sorry to interrupt. I'm saying
Go on.
when I worked in the oil industry, it was very much about making money for the man. You know, it
Yeah.
big nameless corporation, you're earning their profits from. Now, when I get a job right, I make a difference to someone's life, and I
Yes.
enjoy doing it. But I also, rather selfishly, I enjoy seeing the fact that it's made a change to someone's life, whether that's
Yeah. Yeah.
helping them to get a debt written off or reducing their bills, which is basically what I do now. So, it
Yeah.
makes a difference, and it's a much more rewarding way of making a living. It
Yeah.
helps that my wife earns good money because I certainly couldn't afford to do this otherwise. But you know, between us, we manage, so that's all that counts, and
Yes.
we're
Cool.
much happier in our work as a result. So.
I bet you are. You got kids, Lee, as well?
I have two grown up daughters and a grandson who just recently come along. My first grandson.
Yes, I saw the photos online, you cradling the little one.
They're coming round
Wow,
later, so
congratulations.
I'll be looking forward to that.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Congratulations, mate. So, all right, toy soldiers, mate.
Mm.
Um, and you say I love the fact that you kind of almost wear a sandwich board saying, "I'm a war gamer," when you go out into the world. That's great. Love it. Um, You got started with gaming in the mid 1970s, I gather, and you actually started with larger, sort of 132 scale plastics and an elastic band gun. You tell me. So go on then, Lee. Tell us about how your journey into this hobby that we know and love.
So, born in 1969, so obviously mid-70s, I was just starting, like all kids that age, I would have got Airfix toy soldiers. So, I distinctly
Yeah,
remember um, Desert Rats and Africa Corps figures.
yeah,
I think I had some regular Wehrmacht soldiers, so they were in the grey plastic. Um,
yeah.
one of my earliest memories. This is a terrible thing to say on a live show. One of my earliest memories of playing with them, sat in the bath with these soldiers fighting their way around the edge of the bath, along with all the relevant sound effects. Um,
Oh dear.
but no, I mean, as when we got a little bit older, obviously we wanted to play proper games, and we'd have all the toys set out on the carpet. And my
Yeah.
dad made for me an elastic band gun, which you can see on the shelf behind you. Um,
Oh, right.
so
The Thompson submachine gun, is
yeah,
that
yeah,
the
yeah,
elastic band gun?
yeah. So
Wow.
it's
Do you wanna pick it up and
oh yeah, yeah,
show the ladies and gentlemen? Come on, this is live on video. If you're listening, you're missing out here.
there you
Lee
go.
is retrieving from his shelf this wonderful wooden, it's a really good kind of, looks just like a Thompson submachine gun
Yeah.
in profile, but it's so where's the elastic band go then, Lee? How's
So
it
there's
you
some
should have
hooks along the end, and you hook it round the back, and then when you press the trigger, the hook just pushes the elastic band off.
that is
And it pins. And
fantastic.
my dad made these. He made two, one for me and one for my sister, and we would sit there and shoot the Airfix models. Although, you know, like a typical older brother, I did occasionally raise my sights and accidentally hit her. You know, just accidentally, of course. Um,
Of course, yeah,
and
yeah.
I thought these had been lost years ago, and I think my mum and dad were having a tidy up, and somehow my sister had it, and she gave it back to me. She'd found it.
Wow,
Um, but yeah, I thought this was gone many years
forever.
ago, and it got found recently. And yeah, there's my dad's elastic band gun. Like I say, he did make two identical. He obviously didn't have a lot of time at work because he found himself making this. But it's just three sheets of plywood, basically, just glued together and
Fantastic,
bolted
glued together.
with a movable trigger. So you can,
That is
depending on how
fantastic.
long the elastic or how big the elastic band was, you can hook it at different lengths, um, in the
You
hope it
see,
will keep.
that generation, they were craftspeople, weren't they? And
Yeah,
they knew how to put things together.
my dad was always making stuff like that. You know, he'd come home and make. I remember him making a, a tripod out of hugely heavy metal piping. um, and he was a scuba diver, a sports diver, and he
Oh,
cast
really?
all his own lead belt weights, using
Wow.
old lead piping.
I was
um,
gonna say not your old War Games figures,
no,
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 but
no. Lead piping that he'd got
wow.
from somewhere. I don't know where he'd got this lead piping from. Melting it
Yeah,
down in
yeah.
the garden and pouring it into casts, sand casts that he'd made, so he could make belt weights
Wow.
for diving with. Yeah.
How extraordinary. That's amazing.
I
Yeah,
actually just said
but
my skills are not anywhere near his level. If it's miniature, I can figure something out, but anything
yeah,
real life, I'm terrible at
yeah.
DIY. So
Yeah, yeah.
afraid of
Same
it.
here. Do you know what? Hands up, same here. Because my dad was an air mechanic in the Fleet Air Arm during the war and stuff, and he was someone who, again, could fix anything, put anything together. Was brilliant at DIY. He made me toys. Seeing that gun has almost brought a tear to my eye because my dad used to make me things like that. Have I still? No, there was a thing I sometimes have lurking around here, which seems to disappeared at the moment that my dad made. I keep it near my desk somewhere, obviously not near enough. A little toy cannon he made me when I was a little boy. But those kind of things, scraps of wood, bits of metal, and his shed. Did your dad have a shed?
Yeah.
Packed full of stuff. I mean, shelves groaning under the weight of screws and nails of a million different varieties, and hammers and pincers and pliers, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic.
And most of this equipment I wouldn't have the first clue how to use.
Anyway, let's look. So the elastic band gun. This is what you were subjecting your 1/32 scale Airfix figures
Yeah,
to.
it was knock
Uh,
'em over, and you know, when the last figure's down, you've won. So, like I say, occasionally I'd sacrifice the win for the opportunity to shoot my sister. Um, uh, but yeah, I mean, that was, you know, when I didn't realise it at the time, but when I look back on it now, obviously that was my first attempt at wargaming, sort of. Um,
yeah, yeah,
uh, and, you know, after that, my hobby career, if you like, would probably have just gone, you know, probably would have been the end of it. But it was
yeah.
early 80s when a friend of mine brought a fighting fantasy book by Ian Livingstone
Oh,
into
right.
school one day, and we all had a go at this book, and it was a revelation. It was like, well, you mean there's something other than board games?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, and very shortly after that, somebody brought the red box D&D set, and that was it. That was my life changed, and I
Yeah.
didn't realise it at the time, but obviously that would lead on to wargaming and painting miniatures for the rest of my life. So
Yeah, so tell us about those early days. I mean, so that sudden progression from spanging elastic bands at things to discovering what there are rules to this kind of thing. And were you also were you a kid who watched lots of war movies and stuff,
Oh,
and were
yeah.
inspired by other stuff outside?
Yeah, yeah.
Anything you remember in particular?
We my dad's always been interested in World War II, always had books on World War II. I mean, this is one of the things is when, like I said to you earlier, I was a very late reader and I ended up having a special teacher to sort of get me to read. But as soon as I did start
Mm,
to read, I always had a book in my hand. And
mm.
inevitably, it would be my dad's World War II books. Um,
Ah, right.
not history books, but novels and stuff. Probably most of
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
looking back, some of them were highly inappropriate for a kid of my age. Um, uh,
Probably. Yeah, yeah.
but I was always reading something, and so, but it was I got into the history side of it later on, but it was a case of there was
Mm,
always a war movie on the TV and
mm.
always a pile of history books and novels around the house. I remember my dad had a series of coloured books. I can't remember the name of the series, but they were big magazine style books with coloured diagrams of all different battleships and submarines, and I
Oh,
was
right.
fascinated by that. And somewhere I know at home he's got a full uh, set of books, which is like the Illustrated Evening News, I think, from the war, covering the
Oh,
whole
wow.
period of the war. So,
Wow.
I'll get my hands on those eventually. But they're, again, fascinating. And then it was the one shared interest, if you like, that we had, and still have.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Oh, that's nice. You so your dad's still with us
oh
then?
yeah, 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 yeah. He's 80 on Friday, so
Oh, wow.
um,
Happy birthday to him.
indeed,
Oh,
indeed.
that's brilliant.
Um,
So that's lovely because that again, I can that echoes for me, that resonates for me, Lee, because Dad was a big reader,
mm,
always had loads of encyclopedias
mm,
and books about the war and war novels and stuff like that. Yeah, it's. I think we were lucky. You know, you're still sort of you're not that much younger than me. I was 1961, but yes, our parents were of that generation, I suppose,
mm,
because the war had been such a huge part of their lives.
mm,
Let's face it. That there was a lot of literature around at that time.
mm.
You know, just afterwards. And were you a model maker as well, Lee? Did you make airfix kits, that
W
kind of thing?
I didn't do them myself, but I'd often do them with my dad. So yes, we had Airfix kits, but it would be something like I would instruct him to do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, enamel paints and that sort of thing. And um, I mean, the thing is you mentioned about that generation. I mean, my dad would have been, and we were both heavily influenced by our parents or their
Yeah.
parents rather. I mean, my dad's
Yeah.
dad served in India and Burma. Um,
Oh, right. Wow.
my other granddad on my mum's side, unfortunately, he was invalided out of the war because he had really bad asthma, but he
Oh,
ended
right.
up working in the Woolwich Arsenal. Um,
Oh,
uh,
crikey.
and
Wow.
lucky he did because that's where he met me nan. So if it wasn't for that,
Oh,
I wouldn't
right.
be here. um,
Yeah, yeah.
and again, loved the stories I'd get from him because there was one particular story that I have to tell. It's sort of like again one of these fate kept me in existence because he
Yeah.
should be dead. My granddad should have died at a very early age because he was as well as being asthmatic, he was a heavy smoker, as everyone was at that age,
Oh,
and
yeah,
he
yeah.
couldn't stand being in the air raid shelter because everyone was smoking, and he was smoking, but he needed to be outside. So he went out one day, and a bomb hit the air raid shelter and basically killed a load of people. And
Oh my
it was the fact that
god.
he was out having a quick fag saved him. Um,
Oh my
and then
god.
shortly after that, he met me nan, and the rest is history, as they say. But it was stories
Wow.
like that, and the fact that he knew people who had um, gone to Arnhem, for instance. So
Right.
he had friends who were involved. Um, but for his asthma, he probably would have been with them.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I can't complain, as I say, because otherwise he wouldn't have met me nan. But
Yeah.
those sort of growing up with those sort of stories, war stories, my dad's books, talking to my grandfather,
Mm.
um, it was almost inevitable. I don't think they realised they were generating a history buff and a future war gamer, but that's
Well,
basically what they did.
yeah.
They laid the groundwork. Um,
Yeah.
which other games, like I say, friends brought in role playing games into school, and that was it. and that ultimately led to wargaming and historical wargaming.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I don't think they quite realised where this was going.
No, absolutely. I've just it's just occurring to me while we're talking, Lee, for listeners who are in more distant land, might not realise the area of London where you live, Dagenham, East London, of course, was heavily
Mm,
blitzed during the war. It's for a long time. I haven't been there for years, Lee, but
mm,
it always used to be a very heavily industrialised area. Known in the 60s, Ford Motor Company, of course, had a
mm.
factory at Dagenham. In fact, I think my dad did a stint there because Dad used to work for Ford. Um, and so it's a very heavily blitzed area, the East End of London. So there are a lot of people living in that part of London who, even though they didn't necessarily go overseas to the front line, were kind of on the front line of the blitz
Mm.
back at home and had their own stories to tell, as you've just described there. Crikey.
Well, my mum's
Um,
family were all from, like, Poplar and, East Ham, and they got blitzed out,
right.
and that's how they ended up coming to Dagenham. Their
Really?
home was destroyed, so, again, fate lent its hand, and we've ended up in Dagenham, so, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like
Yeah.
you say, the
Sure.
area around here, many of the houses, as I'm finding out in my old 1935 house, a lot of the houses have got bomb damage of one kind or another.
So long as you haven't still got a bomb in the
Well,
basement
you
there,
never know.
Lee. I'm gonna digress again. Did you see there was a story on the BBC, of this couple? I can't remember exactly where they lived,
Yeah,
up in Stockport or somewhere like that. And they basically, a policeman noticed that they had an unexploded bomb in their back
yeah,
garden
yeah.
that was sort of had obviously landed tail first or something and not gone off and was sticking out of the ground, and they painted it red, sort of terracotta red, and they thought it was some sort of ornament. It's like,
Well,
and the woman, when she was doing her gardening, if it was a bit muddy, she'd clean her trowel by tapping it on the end of this bomb. How the and it'd been there for well, donkey's years,
yeah.
obviously, and how but it was still live. This is the point, it was still live, and so how they'd managed not to obliterate not only themselves, but the entire neighborhood just beggars belief.
I'd like to think that I would perhaps be a little bit more clued up than that because my grandfather used to tell a story about, butterfly bombs, how
Yeah,
he knew people who'd been injured by butterfly bombs because they were often brightly painted and kids were attracted to
yes,
them. But my dad being a sports diver, he would often come across stuff, and another one
yeah,
of his stories, I remember he went on a diving trip on staying on a boat, and one of his friends had brought up something, and it was all corroded, and he's banging it on the side of the boat, and he's saying, well, I don't know what this is. It looks like a transformer or something like that. And my dad said, no, that's a hand grenade. It was like a Bakelite incendiary grenade or something like that.
oh
And
my
they
god,
basically had to
yeah.
throw it overboard because the ship captain knew what it was, and he said, "Get it off my ship."
Oh my word,
um,
good grief,
yeah, so I
yeah,
mean, they would obviously channel British sports divers swimming in the channel,
yeah,
bound
yeah,
to come across all sorts of stuff.
I bet.
Yeah. So, yeah, I
Wow,
like to
how
think I'm a little bit more clued up than the
yeah.
average person. If I see something a little bit suspicious, I'll be looking at it and going, "Do you know what? I'm not going near that."
Yeah, I recognise that shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, we don't want to dissuade overseas visitors from coming here for tourism, of course. Honestly, it's quite safe here
Yeah.
most of the time. So anyway, now let's get back on track. Your first kind of war gamey games with rules then, you were in the fantasy sci-fi kind of side of things. So, and as you mentioned, you got the original Dungeons and Dragons, right? The red box and
Mm.
everything. So
Still have it
tell us
somewhere,
about
I think.
oh wow. So tell us about that, Lee. I mean, how did that come about? How did you discover that? Were was that just by sheer chance? How did it happen? And your mates and you got started with it. Tell us about that
Yeah.
early
Group of
beginnings.
friends at school, like I say, we somebody brought in one of the fighting fantasy books by Ian Livingstone.
Yeah.
and it was sort of, "Oh, this is interesting and different, and it's not a board game,"
Yeah.
and we can define where we go within certain limits
Yeah.
with this story.
Yeah.
And then shortly afterwards, I can't remember which person brought it, but somebody said they'd got this other game called Dungeons and Dragons. Um, and so we got a small group together and we played a game, and wow, light bulb moment. This was like complete revelation. Um,
Mm.
and I can distinctly remember our first game, um, and my appalling character, which was a sort of a combination between a Conan the Barbarian and a knight. I was young at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
I'd painted a model. Somehow
yeah.
I'd got this sort of knight type model and painted it in enamels, which I've never used since. Um, uh, and the first kill, if you like, was a carrion crawler, and it was like, wow,
All right.
this is a really good game. And we had as a group, we played for years. A lot of the time, we'd use existing modules and games pre-written, but we did some of our own.
Yeah,
Did all the usual Dragonlance stuff,
yeah.
all different types of modules and stuff. Played for many, many, many years, and indeed, I still play with some of those original friends from school. Um, nowadays, though, it's across Zoom because we're scattered to the four winds.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I've got one friend who lives in Los Angeles, another lives up in
Oh,
Lincoln.
wow.
So the only way we're ever going to get together now is virtually, but we still
Yeah,
play. These days it's our own created scenarios and stories that we're telling. Um,
yeah,
but I, the link to wargaming is the miniatures. Obviously, we were painting.
yeah.
Well, I was certainly painting miniatures right from the very beginning. Um,
All right.
Appallingly painted miniatures, and I wish I still had them. I no idea what happened to those first miniatures,
Yeah,
um, but I've never stopped painting since. And I always like to play whatever game it was we were playing. I would always end up painting it. Um,
yeah.
and as inevitably we wanted massed battles, and we ended up doing Warhammer Fantasy Battle
Mm.
for a long, long time. I would regularly turn up with a fully painted army and then be beaten by unpainted metal on a regular
Of course.
basis.
Of course, that's how it works.
Yeah.
I actually, I just wanted to ask you because I'm interested there because obviously I've number of people who I've interviewed over the years started with D&D,
Mm,
that kind of stuff, but a lot of them started it with what's called theatre of the mind. So
mm,
it didn't actually have miniatures; just it was what's inside your head
mm.
with the dungeon master describing what's going on. But you were immediately attracted to the miniatures by the sound of things.
Yeah.
That brought it to life for you, made it easier for you to kind of envisage what was going
No,
on.
I
Tell us
think
about that.
it just felt like the two were intrinsically linked. So I always painted miniatures, and later on, when I ran my own campaign,
Mm,
it was very much about getting models down on the table. And I didn't realise it probably at the time, but I was playing a skirmish war game, um,
mm,
using the rules and stretching them to breaking point to do these big
yeah,
skirmish fights. Um, Uh, so yeah, the miniatures were always integral to the game. I mean, now ironically, we're playing the latest version of D&D. I really
yeah,
still love the red box D&D for its simplicity, like you say, the theatre of the
yeah,
mind, the ability to craft and tell a story. Um,
yeah,
um, but that's also a skill that I think I like about when we war game now. When I play historical
yeah,
war games with a different group of friends, I
mm,
like that story arc of the battle. Um, the, the
yeah,
the how did this scenario come about? Whether it's historical or a made up scenario,
mm,
or the imaginations type thing. Um, so for me, it's the storytelling is almost more
yeah,
important than the rules. I mean, obviously the rules are important. There's a load of people
yeah,
screaming when I say that.
yeah.
But no, I mean, I still play D&D, still love role playing games, as well as wargaming, because it's just part of my DNA at this point. I've been playing
Mm,
D&D for longer than I can remember, and
mm,
as I say, largely with the same group of friends, amazingly.
yeah,
Uh, and for a long, we've all taken turns at running games. There was a long period where I uh, run my own campaign, wrote a complete world setting. um, Don't know why. It was absolutely crazy because it went into far too much detail.
Tell me about it. You're talking to a convert here or fellow sinner. Obviously, you know that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I, I'm interested as well in the your interest in the fantasy side of things because, of course, um, is it? Do you, did you find, or do you, maybe you still find that that provides you with more of a sense of escapism than doing historical stuff, or is it just it's an equal interest? What are your thoughts about that, Lee?
I've definitely changed over the years. I do love history and I love historical war games, and I wouldn't play fantasy war games now. I mean, the closest I've get is probably Frostgrave, and I very rarely play that, but
Oh,
I have got a collection of Frostgrave stuff. Um, I'm keeping hold of it in the hopes that one day my D&D group will actually get to physically gather and I can go, "There's this game here."
all
um,
right.
but no, I mean, I'm very firmly a historical wargamer now. But I do like the escapism and the problem solving that comes with playing a D&D
Mm,
game, um,
mm,
uh, and taking a different character and finding a way of making that character your own. And I
mm.
was very interested in your short video that you did the other day, your off the cuff episode about D&D.
Right.
You know, as a group, we've all been playing D&D most of our lives, so it's not like we've
Mm,
come to the concept late and are struggling with
yeah.
the idea of how to role play. We've all done it for a long, long time,
Mm,
and some of my group are fully fledged actors, been on TV and all the rest, so they're good at the acting side
right.
of it. But I just
Wow.
like the fun and the camaraderie that comes with being with a group of friends trying to solve a problem. How do we use
Mm,
this piece of equipment or this particular spell or whatever it is to do something that it
mm,
wasn't designed to do? Um,
yeah.
because
I know. That's as a games master, that's the thing you have to deal with as well as yeah. That's what it says in the book, Henry. But can we do this with it
Yeah.
instead?
And I've been on both sides of the DM screen here. I've run a
Yeah,
campaign, and I very quickly learned that as an umpire, you have to be completely flexible and
yeah,
cheat like nobody's watching, right? Because they
yeah,
don't necessarily know. And you have
yeah.
to be flexible. You have to respond to what your players are, the way they're taking things. I mean, when I ran a campaign, it was very much I had a story arc that I was trying to follow. So I was
Mm,
leading my players down a particular route, but they could go get at it by multiple avenues. But
mm,
it was about listening to them and crafting a little side and twists and turns from what they wanted to do. Um,
yeah.
and so I, say when I wrote this ridiculously huge campaign world, um, that immediately set a problem for anyone who wanted to play a magic user, because it was like a post cataclysmic world where magic was the cause of the cataclysm, so everybody
Ah,
hated magic, and magic users were on the run and had to operate in hiding unless they were extremely rich and powerful, in which case they sat in their towers and everyone ignored
yeah,
them, because they couldn't
yeah,
do anything about it. But of course,
yeah.
anyone who wanted to be a magic user in my group had to suddenly figure out how they were going to cast a spell without anyone realizing they'd cast a spell. So,
Oh,
eh,
clever.
so that was good fun. Um, and it just like you say, responding to what players wanted, and throwing a few. I liked the theatrical side. Um,
Mm.
Throwing a few curveballs in there that would I don't know, I've got another story, and this is
Go
one
on, tell it, tell
I
it.
shouldn't admit to because it was terrible. When I think about it, it was terrible, but it did create a really interesting. There was a section that the group that I was running. They were investigating a murder, and they're in this city,
Yeah,
and they're chasing down a suspect, and they're going up this steep hill, weaving in between all these stalls and people, and at one point the person they're chasing basically kicks the chocks out from under a cart that's got a load of fish in it. And this cart
yeah.
starts barreling downhill towards them, bouncing, and eventually tumbles over and shatters, throwing fish everywhere. Which is the point at which I took my little box of fish heads from my dinner earlier in the week and tossed them over the DM screen to land all over the table. That
Oh,
made an impression.
fantastic.
Um,
Oh, that's fantastic.
so yeah, so any prop is legitimate when I'm umpiring a
Yes.
game. But,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
back to miniatures and normal behaviour. Um, the
Mate,
campaign
we're war gamers. What's that
yeah,
word
no,
you just used?
no such thing,
Normal.
is there? No, there was a moment at the end of the first sort of arc of this story that I was telling where
Yeah,
the city they were in was under attack, and I had
yeah.
sound effects going on in the background. I had an entire wall, city wall. I think it was an old citadel polystyrene. I can't remember what it was
Oh,
called
right.
now.
Yeah, yeah.
Great battles type thing. It was a city wall, with
Excellent.
battlements and all the rest, and loads of buildings behind it. And this, typically me, I couldn't just underdo it. I had 4 foot of city wall, and it was like this polystyrene wall that was made by a Games Workshop. I can't remember the name of the set, but I
Right.
can't
Yeah.
even remember where I bought it from. But I painted it all. I had all the buildings behind, a couple of streets behind it, loads of figures to defend the walls, and this army of dark elves and a demon on the outside of the wall. And I'm doing all of this using the D&D mechanic to run this massive
Oh my God.
sort of
Yeah.
skirmish game, really. And a lot of it wasn't actively being gamed, if you like.
Yeah.
The characters were in a particular spot, and they were engaged with this demon that was leading the attack. And and it was clear that we needed something a little bit more meatier than that.
Yeah.
But as a group, I was the only one who was really. I mean, as a group, we'd done wargaming, we'd done some Warhammer Fantasy battles, but I was the only one who was
Yeah.
really interested in doing bigger battles. Um, so that was as big as I could make it using the rules, and a lot of and being the umpire, as I was saying earlier, a lot of fudging the dice rolls and seeing where the players wanted the story to go. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I was a bit of a showman in that respect. I had to have it big, with like I say, sound effects and all sort of physical props. I'd often have
Yeah.
physical props, so they find a chest with treasure in, and I would hand them a chest with treasure in,
Oh
and
my word.
documents and stuff like that. That I'd aged with tea or coffee or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Mate,
so
you're a
yeah,
man after my own heart. I've got to tell you, because my mostly, as I think I've said on my podcast before, mostly sort of civilian players, uh, they like it when I do all the extra fluff stuff. I put on silly voices, I make stuff, I do little recordings, sound effects. I'm completely with you, Lee.
yeah.
I love that stuff. I love that stuff.
I mean, in some
So
respects, it's a million miles away from wargaming, but it's still showmanship. It's telling a story,
yeah,
and often a lot of D&D is basically a skirmish war game. You're fighting a
yeah,
combat. A lot of each little story arc, each little adventure ends up in a fight. That's
yeah,
what D&D is. So it's without realizing it, we were playing a skirmish war game,
yeah,
but with a bit of role playing thrown in to tell the pad out the story.
yeah.
Um, and as I say, as a group, I was probably the only one who was really interested in taking this further and doing bigger battles. So we did
Mm,
play Warhammer Fantasy Battle, um, and later on we went on and played epic, so 40,000 epic, so sci-fi.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and again, I would always turn up with a fully painted army and get roundly beaten by an unpainted army. I was an awful wargamer. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. I still lose with flair.
But that's the way to do it, isn't it? If you're gonna lose with
Yeah,
flair and style.
but
That's
I
the
love it.
thing.
I just love that idea of it's like a gigantic game of chess, moving large units around, and
Yeah,
trying to find the weakness and telling a story in the process. In my head, I'm telling a story, um, which obviously inevitably led to me ended up writing a blog, but that's another story. We'll come
yeah,
back to
yeah.
that in a minute.
Let's pause for because you mentioned in passing there that you did get involved with Warhammer and that kind of stuff, Warhammer fantasy battles.
Mm.
So, what armies did you collect then, Lee? Because obviously, one of my patrons, Josh Van Zane will be listening to this because obviously he's the Crown of Command podcast himself, and it's all old hammer, and
Mm,
we'd be talking here about what is now termed old hammer gaming.
yeah.
So, what sort of stuff did you play with, Lee?
I had a large undead army with the original Citadel plastic skeletons. Um,
Yeah.
Fantastically simple models, really easy to paint. But again, everything was painted. I would never fielded anything unpainted. That would have been terrible. As I say, not that it stopped me from losing, but anyway. Um, uh, and we as a group we would all pick different armies. So one friend was
Yeah.
into dwarves, another liked his elves, and so on. Um, and the same when we moved on to the sci-fi gaming. We'd all have one army and we'd all sort of share and play collectively. But their passion wasn't in the wargaming side of it. We did it for a few years. We moved on as a group, kept role playing, kept playing D&D and Call of Cthulhu and things like that. But I really liked doing wargaming, and that's where I sort of
Mm,
wanted to go. But it was many years later before I finally got a chance to play it properly and go into historicals, which is what I really was
yeah.
interested in doing. Um,
Right.
uh, but yeah, an early start with fantasy models and getting beaten on a regular basis.
One thing that's occurring to me as well, having just mentioned Josh, hi Josh, by the way, is that obviously one thing that Games Workshop I know did for me when I was going through the wargaming spectrum is that I picked up a lot of painting tips from doing Warhammer Fantasy stuff and Games Workshop stuff. Was that true for you as well, Lee? Did you find that your contact with Games Workshop and maybe White Dwarf magazine, that kind of thing, you picked up kind of painting tips? Did it change your technique? Because I think
Yeah.
it was round about then I switched to using acrylics, for example, because I'd been a Humbrol enamels kind of guy for a
Yeah.
long time, and it was because of those. Oh my god, those octagonal or hexagonal, what they were, old Games Workshop Citadel paints
Mm.
that I started using, experimenting with acrylic colors. Did that happen for you as well, Lee?
Yeah, I mean that's where I learned the art of painting. I mean, I paint completely differently now, but nonetheless, I learned the basic
Mm,
skills. Block painting and highlighting and dry brushing and all the
mm,
rest. You know, and constantly nosing the White Dwarf magazine, looking at
mm.
their painting techniques and going, "I'm never going to paint as good as that,"
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but wanting to try. But I was the only one in the group that was really into that in a big way. So uh, and of course, all this time I was still painting individual figures for role playing games. And I
yeah.
still do. I still paint stuff occasionally for role playing games, even though we don't play on a table anymore. As I say, it's all virtual these days because of the nature of where we're scattered to. But yeah, I mean that
Mm,
was the era when I learned to paint and got the bulk of my uh, painting done for my
yeah.
fantasy armies. And um, I don't think I ever went to a Games Workshop store to learn how to paint, but it was all straight out in a magazine or one of
Yeah, yeah,
their art books and stuff like that. Um,
yeah.
yeah, good fun, good times. And unfortunately, that army long since got passed on, and I found occasionally find a couple of models that somehow didn't get passed on. Um, so I've got about 2 or 3 figures left out of that army that was
Oh,
huge. It was an
right.
absolutely huge army.
Yeah.
And I do. I mean, I've got nowhere to put it. I hasten to add because that was obviously 28 mil type scale, 25, 28
Yes.
millimeter figures, all Citadel stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I do sort of go, well, I wish I'd kept that army. But then you can say that about so many different sets of figures that you get over the years. And for
Yeah,
various
yeah,
reasons,
yeah.
they pass them on and you lament them afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm thinking about it just again, listening to you popped into my head. There was that wonderful little s- uh, standalone Citadel painting guide that they
Oh, yeah.
did,
I think I've got
uh,
that here somewhere.
which you're probably going to point at your shelf. I could point at it on my shelf, but it's too far for me to actually reach. But yes, there was, and there was a book book that came out, something like Heroes for War Games. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah,
Really early on, might be before your time. You're such
possibly.
a young man compared to me. But there was a number of publications that Games Workshop slash Citadel did at that time that were just, as you said, the heavy metal team, as
Mm,
they were known in White Dwarf. These people with astonishing painting skills,
yeah,
and it's really interesting to see how the Games Workshop's own painting styles that they promoted has changed over time because it's changed to match the products that they've wanted to
mm,
manufacture, right? So that back in the old days, it was just straight acrylic paints, and then of course nowadays it's contrast paints, and they had all the base paints, and so all this painting team, their job was to basically help promote the sale of the paints,
mm.
right? But all the same, their abilities were staggering.
Well, it was like the artists like John Blanchet were a big influence because although I couldn't
Yeah,
paint like him, he had a very free style about the way he painted. It was none of this
yeah,
nice, clean, block painting and that. It was very much more. I can the only word I can term for it is organic, a much more
yes,
natural way of painting, and I think there's a bit of that in the way I paint. I'm less worried about getting it inside the lines than the overall
oh,
impact at the end.
right.
Um, one of the reasons I like 6 mil. uh, Slap on some ink, it covers up all sorts of problems. But it's the
Fantastic.
end effect,
Yeah,
and just
yeah,
being a little less stressed and worried about keeping it inside the lines and more worried about
yeah,
what the
yeah,
end effect is. Um, I'm
yeah.
not going to win any painting competitions, and I don't want to. But I do hope
Because
my
I'm
models
thinking,
look all right on the James table. So,
the guy I remember, was it Mike McVeigh in
mm,
the heavy metal team, who was just an astonishing and highly accurate painter.
yeah.
And I think that's the thing, is that I foolishly tried to emulate him and just didn't come anywhere close. But never mind, made the effort. It was fun.
I've only
Um,
ever entered one painting competition, and it was a very early salute, and I painted a model, and I was really pleased with it. And when it was one of their previous year's figure, so there was a load of versions of this.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
it was an orc
yeah,
riding a warg or something like that. And
yeah,
I when I saw them all, when I looked at mine, I thought, right, mine's definitely the worst, and I was really proud of that. I'm
yeah.
not doing that again.
It's best to be realistic about one's own abilities,
Yeah.
isn't it? So anyway, so you've done fantasy, D&D, Warhammer, and then you also kind of went through what you described to me as kind of a wilderness years thing, where you kind of went off and didn't do much gaming because you got involved with raising a family and stuff, I assume.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I think about it, I did do a lot of gaming. It just wasn't a lot of. There was no wargaming as such, and
Mm,
or very little wargaming. Um, and as a group, as a role playing group, we were starting. All of us were starting careers and moving, and it was getting increasingly
mm,
difficult for us to get together. Um, but we played collectible card games of various kinds. Um,
mm,
we still did the occasional standalone role playing games and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean,
mm,
I was at that age. I was keeping my hobby interests to myself, not letting my employers know, thinking that
yeah.
somehow that would make a difference. Many years later, I came to the conclusion that it didn't make a blind bit of difference. I might as well
Ah,
be open and honest about my hobby.
exactly. Nobody cares,
Yeah.
basically.
Um, I mean, the one thing I do remember from the period is the few war games that we did do. It was all on the floor, crawling around.
Wow.
My knees just hurt thinking about it
I was gonna
nowadays.
say, yeah, yeah. Ouch.
Yeah, um, but it petered out because as a group, as I say, they weren't interested in wargaming, and they certainly weren't interested
Yeah,
in historical wargaming. And
yeah,
didn't mean to say that I wasn't. I was. I just didn't really have an outlet for it
yeah,
until I started to go to shows. And see other people's war games tables and just absolutely blown away by the this whole new world. It was like my hobby had started all over again.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So, also, during those wilderness years, in inverted commas, you mentioned to me in your notes that that's also when you did do a lot of your world building stuff. Is that right?
yeah, yeah. So I say that really the only thing that kept going was the D&D group, and that was the point when I
Mm,
wrote this world setting. Um, I don't know why I didn't just use an existing world setting. It just tickled me, and then once I'd started the
mm.
project, I couldn't stop it. You know what it's like. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it ended up being this huge document with everything from the flora and fauna of the various islands. I mean,
Wow.
essentially, the world was there was this gigantic continent. It was overwhelmed and flooded, and all that was left was this arc of islands, which were the peaks of a mountain range. Um,
Oh,
and
wow.
some of those mountains were inhabited by the dwarves, and then the human races, and so on. Yeah, as I say, a low magic setting. You know, it was used all the normal D&D mechanics, but
Mm,
mages had a hard time. Um,
yeah.
but the level of detail I went into was just ridiculous. I was never going to use it in a game, but once I'd started, I couldn't stop writing it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's one of those things. I've still got it here. I've still got my booklet that I made, and I gave a copy to all my players, in the vain hope that they might actually read it and take it all on board. I mean, a calendar in there, and the seasons, and what the weather
Wow.
was like, and what the main products were from different parts of the different islands, what their specialities were. These are
Yeah.
iron metal makers, and these are miners, and whatever, let's say, and a ridiculous level of detail that was utterly unnecessary for the campaign story that I was telling. And one of
I
these days,
love it.
I will eventually get back to that and rerun another game. I've got the original character sheets from that game that I
Right.
ran, and at the time, the campaign ended with me literally. They had to go to hell to
Oh, right.
stop a plot, and so did the full Dante's 9 levels of hell type thing.
Wow.
Um, and they had to go through all these different things to get to this city and stop this plot, and they did. But at the end of it, they all ended up with psychological flaws as a result of what they'd seen. Um, and I was
Fantastic.
looking forward to playing another campaign arc where they were trying to deal with the damage that had been done to them. um,
Fantastic.
and we never did get to play it because we had a break, and then say people were moving around, and we're still playing, but we're playing other games. But one of these days, maybe when I retire, we go, right,
That's
time to dust off
fantastic.
your old characters, and we'll revisit uh, the world. Yeah, so yeah.
I got to tell you, I'd love to see this stuff, Lee. Because also, hey, you got to use your degree after all, by the sound of things. All this environmental stuff that's involved with that sounds absolutely brilliant, and it's just music to my ears, Lee. I love this kind of stuff. Now, you mentioned that at some point you went to a war game show and thought, "Blimey!"
Yeah.
So, how did that come about, Lee?
Well, as a group, as a role playing group, we'd been to Dragon Meet quite a few times. So I don't know if you've
Right?
ever been to Dragon Meet. It's very much a role
No, I haven't.
playing type festival type thing, and it was at Kensington Town Hall for a while. Um, uh, and I've still been going in recent years, but with my kids, which is bizarre,
Right?
because
Yeah.
they're all role players now.
Oh,
But
wow.
it was again, there was a lots of miniatures and dice and lots of different types of games on, and inevitably we just found out about this other show that would have a load of traders there, and it turned out to be Salute.
Of
I'm trying to
course, at
remember.
Kensington Town Hall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it would have been 2004. So that was
Right.
probably my first proper war game show, and I went there to buy D&D figures, um, and stuff like that, and paints, and all the things that we spend our money on. And of course, I get there, and there's fantasy games going on, but there's also these massive historical games. 6 millimeter American Civil War game that was just sort of mind blowing to me. And thinking like, oh, where have you been all my life?
Yes.
um, and I was immediately transported back to that little boy playing with his Airfix plastics on the side of the bath.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
with me elastic band gun, and thinking like, this is what I should have been doing all along. But it is. I mean, this is one of the things that I've always thought is sometimes you can be forgiven for thinking that all wargamers of a certain age only entered wargaming via one path. They found a copy
Yes.
of Charles Grant or Featherstone in their school library,
Yeah.
and they started
Yeah.
playing. And not everyone comes to wargaming that way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, like I say, as a group, we were very much role players. We did eventually end up doing wargaming, but fantasy based, because that's what the group was interested in.
Yeah.
As the one person interested in the historical side, I wasn't about to drag them all into a historical wargaming. I didn't even know how
Sure.
to start. And I got to
Yeah.
discover Featherstone and Grant and all those books later on, and enjoy them for
Yeah.
myself once I got into the hobby. But Salute was the
Yeah.
first time when I really saw the potential for historical wargaming. I still didn't have a clue how I was going to find people to play it, because obviously my current group at the time weren't interested.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm still painting figures for role playing, and I started to paint some historical stuff. And eventually, I decided to start a blog just as a way of improving my painting and sharing my painting
Yeah.
skills. And that inevitably got me noticed by a few people. And these two
Yeah.
strange guys come up to me at Selwig one year and said, "Do you want to come and play a game with us?" And that was Ray and Fran from the Postie's Rejects. And 10, 12, 13 years later, they still haven't got rid of me.
Wow, that's quite something, isn't it? So the blog, tell people about, so because deciding to blog, I mean, obviously I started back in 1998,
Wow.
with my first Battle Games website. There was me and the miniatures page, and I think that was it
Mm.
at that time. And I was astonished back then about, wow, who are these people suddenly arriving and sending me emails back in the day when emails was like, we still had screaming modems, whenever you tried to connect and all that kind of stuff. Goodness me. And someone sent me an email. What do I do? Someone sent me an email. What? Wow, they're in Latvia. What? And oh, I've seen your. Of course, we didn't call them blogs back then. It was just a website. So what, but I know taking on a blog is really quite a thing, because it's like, oh gosh, this is exciting. It's a bit like self-publishing. Gosh, I can write stuff and send it out there, and it's out there instantly, and people can respond. What was it that inspired you to start blogging? And more than that, what was it that's helped you to sustain doing the blog? Because there've been any number of people we know over the years, there's been any number of people who started a blog with a flurry of activity for a few months, and then they're kind of like, oh, I don't know what to say now. I've
Mm.
said everything I've wanted to say. It was kind of just like a blur splurge. And even for those of us who are veterans at it in one way or another, content creation is hard work. Oh, blimey, what am I going to do next time? So, what is it that first inspired you to start Blogly and then has sustained you in blogging ever since then?
Well, I started my blog in 2009, and it was purely as a way of sharing my painting. And it was all about improving the quality of my painting. Because I'd done a few shows by that point, and I'd realised that there was this wider world of people sharing stuff, and I'd
Mm,
found other people's blogs and thought, this is a good way of making a few friends and sharing my stuff. And I didn't really, at the time, I didn't really appreciate where it might lead. Um,
mm.
and initially, I posted daily, which is just insane. And they weren't long posts, but I would post what I was painting on, or I would write something about the
Yeah,
D&D game that I was playing, or whatever, all sorts of content. Um,
yeah,
uh, Needless to say, the daily posting lasted about a year, and then I'd had enough of that. And
yeah,
the thing that sustained it is being flexible, frankly, is the ability to go, right, do you know what? I can't do daily posting. I'll post
yeah,
twice a week or whatever, and not
yeah,
stress if I can't. Um,
yes,
uh, Also, I'm a little bit odd in that I do love the stats. So I was looking at the stats, looking at how many people were following or how many people would watch the post
yeah,
and going, "Oh, I chase that and do another post."
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And there's a bit of that about YouTubing as well, constantly looking at the analytics. Uh, it's almost a hobby in its own right.
Yeah.
Uh, but I very quickly realised that having a blog and post, being prepared to put yourself out there and say, "I'm a gamer," "I paint toy
Mm,
soldiers," um, meant you suddenly encountered other people that were exactly the same. Um,
yeah.
and that was around about the time when I decided, "Right, I can't hide this. I'm on social media now. People are gonna find me. Anyone can discover me." So I was open and honest about I'm a gamer, you know, no
Mm,
big deal about it, but just sort of
mm,
made a conscious decision. I'm not going to hide my hobby, and I'm glad I
mm,
didn't, because writing the blog and putting myself out there, like I say, led to me meeting and getting into conversations, and making friends online who ended up becoming friends in the real world. Um,
mm,
uh, and I still say it today, and it was exactly the same then as it is now. The wargaming community is brilliant for that sort of thing. Um,
mm,
Everyone wants to share, or at least my impression is everyone wants to share, and on the whole, we're a very friendly and convivial bunch, and a very let's say, always I get sent all sorts of stuff. Oh, I've got this set of rules, or I've got this answer to a question you was talking about. Send me a file with some flags or whatever. But people want to share, and it's just a wonderful, uh,
mm,
very friendly environment to build a hobby in. And when it turns into physically meeting people, either at shows,
mm.
I've been blogging and doing the YouTube channel now for long enough that my ugly mug is out there. People recognise me, and it is nice to bump into people and have a chat with them. Um,
Mm.
but obviously, it also, let's say, it led to these two strange guys coming up to me and saying, "Oh, we follow your blog. Do you want to come to our games?" Um, and so I went off to see this group of strange fellas in Gravesend, and then they kept inviting me back, and can't get rid of me now. So
Yes, let's talk about the Posties rejects, where most of the members are neither Posties nor rejects. So but there's one person who did used to be a policeman, not policeman, a postman. Who was it? Who was the
it,
postie?
Stuart, who is the postie, it's his shed we play in. It's mostly his
Right.
insane collection of figures, every period known to man, and some we've never heard of. You know, Yeah,
Really?
he's got sets of figures and periods that we've never played with, and I've been playing with him for 13 years.
Seriously?
He's got thousands of figures all over the place. We're going to need, you know, we're going to need bulldozers when it comes to clearing his house out, because there's going to be so much lead in that house. But he's the ex postman. Nobody else is. But we're rejects because we firmly believe that no other club would have us, because we don't turn up on a regular basis. It's very much a call of, Stuart will put out the call. I'm going to run a game next weekend. Who can attend? And various
Mm,
people say, yeah, I'm free, and we'll gather. And then usually we find out what we're playing when we turn up, and we'll be sitting there having our cup of tea, or pre-game cup of tea or coffee, and he throws a load of bits of paper down on the table, and you all take a piece, and it determines which division you've got and what period it is and whatever. And we love that because we're constantly playing different periods. And over the
yeah.
years, we've all got our own collections, and we've all brought our own games to the shed of war. Um,
Mm,
because he's got this huge table, it's a ridiculously large table, and loads of terrain, and we can just go in there and set up and run our own stuff. So, taken my own collections there on many occasions, and some other rejects have done the same. But it's not like, I mean, I've never been part of a club. It has to be said. I did try
yeah.
once to join a local club here in Dagenham, and they were just a strange bunch. I felt so awkward. I never went back. And
Oh,
they're
right.
probably nice guys, but I felt
Okay.
a bit awkward when I just turned up one night.
Right.
But as Postage Rejects, I say we're not a club. We're just a group of mates. There's about a dozen of us. Sometimes there's fewer, sometimes there's more. We've taken on a few new players recently,
All
people
right.
who live in the local area and who want to join in for a game. And there hasn't. I mean, in 13 years of playing with them, we've never had crosswords really. It's always been fun. We're
Mm,
laughing. the neighbours must be really annoyed by the noise levels coming out of the shed because we're laughing all the time, telling dirty jokes and taking the pee out of each other, and that's wargaming for us, and we love it. It is that
Yeah,
social side of it that I really enjoy, and of course we're
yeah,
learning a lot about the various periods that Postie's decided to collect, and then like I say, we've all got our own collections. We often bring them to the shed. Um, so yeah, it was a great way of doing it because I couldn't. I think this is why we say we're rejects. We wouldn't be accepted by any other club because we just couldn't turn up on a weekly basis. Just our
yeah,
lives
yeah,
aren't like
yeah,
that. Um, for
yeah,
various reasons, I couldn't commit to that sort of level of commitment. Whereas if he
yeah.
puts out the call, can you make it? Yeah, no, I can, or no, I can't. It's not. It's no big deal. You're not going to get kicked out of the group because you haven't been able to attend a game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I'm with you on that. Used to run a couple of clubs a long time ago, but I've realised I'm not clubbable in
Mm,
that kind of way, and I because of my working life. Apart from anything else, I can't promise that I can be somewhere every week at the same time, that kind of thing.
mm.
And also, there is that thing that was it Groucho Marx said, I don't want to be a member of any club that wants to have me as a member.
Yeah, very true. I mean,
To a
talking about
certain
work,
degree.
I mean, for a long period when I was working in the oil industry, I was running an office in Grays, but I was also running the team in Southampton. So I'd spend a lot of time travelling backwards and forwards and spend weekends away. So I just
Mm,
couldn't have attended. Couldn't. I never knew where I was going to be. I was always
yeah,
on
yeah,
the road up and down to Southampton and back. Um, and then when you get kids come along, family comes first.
yeah. Of
So
course it does.
I just couldn't be a member of a club. I just wouldn't attend on a regular basis.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and I mean, the other thing is and the downside of that obviously is that we tend to play a lot of house rules rather than official sets of rules. I mean, that isn't to say that we haven't played commercial rule sets, but Stuart has a lot of his own versions of games, for better or
right.
worse. But we know what we're doing. We know what we're doing. They're simple.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
like
yeah,
rules that are simple and fast play, and
yeah.
we can play some massive games with 4 or 5 players aside along this huge table. And they're some of the best games because they're massive. You just couldn't play a game that big at a club. Um, it has to be set up, and I say, and we will generally get a game done in a day. So we'll turn up for 10, quick cup of tea, find out whose side we're on, all pile out
Mm,
to the shed, maybe a bit of time for manoeuvre or repositioning things, mate. Sometimes depending on the rules, and and then we'll be playing till 4, 5, 6 o'clock, and then all back out for another cup of tea and a bit of cake.
yeah.
Makes a
I
sound.
didn't realize there were so many of you actually, Lee. I suppose, because at the shows I usually bump into like two, three, four a
Mm.
time of you. So I didn't realize there was like a dozen of you in various guises
Yeah,
knocking
I mean,
around.
some have come and gone because obviously they moved. People have moved and so on. And we've taken on a couple of new players recently. But yeah, I mean, at the best games we can certainly call on at least 8 players, and then Stuart will umpire. And we do most of our games
Yeah,
are umpired, uh, which
right.
is a good thing and a bad thing because obviously an umpire gets to make all the unpopular decisions when you can't decide how the rules are interpreted. Um, but on the negative side, it also means that we don't have to learn any of his rules. We just go, Stuart, how does this work?
How does this
Fill
work?
them out
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
us.
I know what you mean about that. Yeah, as a man who's just
Yeah.
published a rule set, yeah,
Well, I was
already
actually
the
going to say
the
my video for next weekend is about clarity in war games rules, and the need to write rules that are clear and understandable and don't cause an argument across the games table. Because when you've got an umpire, you can go, just make a decision for us, and we'll abide by it, and we'll argue about it later.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what's happened with yeah. Well, let's not get into my rule set because I can see I've got my phone here. I can see the questions already arriving on my phone, Lee, and it's only the rule set's only been out since about 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning last night. So, what I was going to say was so this. I mean, it sounds great. I mean, and one thing that I would say is whenever I bump into you guys, you're always smiling. right?
Yeah.
That's really lovely. You got your little Posties Rejects logo on your t-shirt. You're always smiling. What are some of the most? Can you think of some of the most memorable games that you've
Mm.
had, or unusual games? Because it sounds to me if Stuart's someone who will suddenly decide to throw the war between Chile and Bolivia at you, or something like that. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of Napoleonic stuff, obviously Crimea, but he'll do American Civil War, American War of Independence. We've done Ancients. Um, uh, when it comes to memorable, one game and one game alone leaps out: the Battle of Hal. Um, it was Napoleonic, and it was a sort of a what if type scenario. I'm trying to remember. I think it was meant to be set a few days after. I can't remember the name of the battle now. There you go. My brain's going, but
That's
it
all
was
right. You're old.
a fictional scenario, and I was given the cavalry, the French, the cream of the French cavalry, and I
Oh
wiped
yeah.
out an entire division with some extremely dodgy dice rolls. I think when I had some hussars charge frontally into me, should not have won the melee, but did, and by a huge amount because I'd rolled so bad and he'd rolled so well. At which point they just rolled back through the next unit, which immediately got disordered and was then hit with a follow-up charge. And then they fell back and went through. And in the meantime, some additional cavalry had come on the table, came in immediately behind the units that were routing, which routed straight through them. And before you know it, the entire wing had disappeared. I think it was actually two divisions of cavalry were gone, and there was this one
No.
hussar unit going, "What happened?" um, I don't like playing a Napoleonic cavalry ever since. So yes, we've had some
Oh, right.
memorable and other games where we've had units that have done some dodgy manoeuvres, like trying to wheel across a fence and an artillery piece, and then go, "Can I charge as well?" And think, like again, that's one of the advantages of having an umpire is they can go, "No, this is the way it works," and we go with it.
Yeah.
But we get to play such a wide variety of games, and I say every time we turn up, it'll be something different. Postie's got a lot of French Indian War stuff, so he can literally cover a 6 foot by 14 foot table in trees, um,
Wow.
and we'll have all encampments
Yeah.
and villages and roads and stuff like that, and models all over the place. I love those games. I particularly like his French Indian War rules. They're really simple. Um, uh, so yeah, and let's say the advantage is we can also bring our own stuff. So we've got a couple of players who've got really good collections of their own periods. Richard as is a good rules writer, written a couple of cracking sets of rules for the French Revolutionary period. Um, in fact, he put a demo game on at one of the broadside shows with
Oh,
his
right.
rules a few years back. Um, really good set of rules, beautifully painted miniatures, just the sort of thing. And I've done my own stuff. I've done uh, uh, the French Foreign Legion game a few years back.
Right.
6 mil World War Two. You know, any period you can name. If we're interested in it and we've got the figures, we can get it out on the table and everyone will join in. We never get a time where someone says, "Oh, I don't want to play that game." So we all play everything. So I like to think that we get a lot more variety than perhaps a club
Mm.
which might have to have the same sort of games on all the time. Of course, the downside
Yeah,
is you
yeah.
don't get to really learn one particular set of rules in that level of detail that you might if you were
Yeah.
playing, say, bolt action week after week.
Yeah.
Uh, so there's a lot of flitting around between periods and rule sets and sort of like, right, how do they react in this period? Oh, not like that, Lee.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
dear,
mean, I'm
fantastic.
one of those players in the group who can be relied upon to do the worst possible thing at the worst possible moment. And I'll
Fantastic.
enjoy doing it.
Absolutely. That's a particular skill set, Lee. That's
Yeah.
well, that's fantastic, about the posties. Now, you also decided, blogging wasn't enough. No, you were gonna start vidcasting, and there you are in your little corner studio. And I've noticed recently you've just invested in a new camera, and you're talking about acoustic. We can probably see the acoustic tiling
Yeah.
on my walls behind me here. You've been talking about that kind of stuff, and there's acoustic blankets over covering this end here. Um, Vidcasting, was this just a natural progression from the vlogging, or did you feel like you wanted to achieve something in particular by moving into the YouTube sphere, as it were?
I'd I'd wanted to do it for a long time, but I didn't have a room to do it in. My oldest daughter moved out in 2019, and bit of shuffling around. My youngest daughter got the bigger room. I got the little corner room. Turned it into my games room. So I've got a very small table, which I'm leaning on now, and my painting desk behind me. And I was sort of toying with the idea of doing a YouTube channel of some kind. I had a YouTube channel for a long time, and I posted some living history stuff, events at living history shows and things. Done a bit of video and
Oh,
thought,
right.
nothing much, but I hadn't really done anything on a regular basis, and I wanted to. And then of course then came COVID, and all of a sudden I'm cut off from my mates. I can't go and play with them. We hadn't yet figured
Mm,
out how to use Zoom. Um,
yeah.
and I just felt like I needed to do something and engage with people because I was stuck indoors like everyone else was. So that's really the
Yeah, yeah.
genesis of the channel. It started off of me just talking rubbish about my favourite hobby with whoever would listen, and it's just snowballed since then. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it has changed a bit because initially it was just sort of like different subjects, and it's sort of evolved a bit into what I call my talking point videos. I do them every Sunday, and it's
Mm.
normally short. Um, no offense to those people who do like their long podcasts,
I couldn't possibly comment.
but I like to have. I didn't think there was a lot of very short content available, so something that you could watch
Yeah,
in a lunch
yeah,
break or a tea break or something like that, or in the car, or listen to
yeah.
in the car. So very early on, I wanted it to be under 15 minutes, uh, and it's sort of evolved into. I mean, I readily admit I'm a bear of little brain, right? I do not actually know a lot about wargaming because I've come at it from a completely different angle from a lot of people. But this is a great conversation. I'll pick a subject, do a little bit of reading about it, spat my
Mm,
views, and then ask the viewers, "What's your experience, or what do you think about this?" And I've
mm,
had some fantastic conversations in the comments and made, I consider, some really good friends as a result of just again
mm,
being prepared to put myself out there about my hobby. And I find
mm,
it's as much a learning and enjoyable experience for me as I hope it is for
mm,
people that subscribe to the channel. Um, but it is very much a case of like I have an opinion on this, or I know a lot about that, but I don't know a lot about that.
mm,
What's your opinion?
mm,
So it's just been really good fun. It's just I wish I'd done it years ago, but I didn't have the facilities for it. And as
mm,
you say, I've recently sort of upgraded my camera gear. I did initially started. I was just using my phone. Video quality and sound quality was awful, but I picked up some viewers and I thought, oh, there's something in this. And then a few people would come up
yeah.
and say hello at shows that I'd attend, and they'd say, "Oh, you're that guy from the video from YouTube," and go, "Oh, I like this."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's just gone on from there. And it is obsessive, I do. I don't think I've missed a single Sunday since I started. So that was back in March 2020. Um,
Wow.
so and occasionally I'll do some extra videos. So I do occasionally do a battle report or
Mm,
a how to make things. Sometimes I'll do an unboxing if I bought something interesting
mm.
or not interesting. I just want to share it
Yeah,
anyway. I mean, at the end of the day,
yeah,
I
yeah.
do the channel because I'm enjoying doing it and I'm learning a load of new skills. Um,
Mm,
and I do think, you know, another good reason to do it, aside from the fact that I love my hobby and I like sharing it and I like engaging with other players, I've learned to be a much better speaker as a result of doing. Well, I hope so. By this point in the podcast, people are going, "God, that Lee Hadley is so boring." But no, I do find that I I can get asked to do presentations at work, and I can at a drop of a hat, I can stand in front of a group of 100
yeah,
people and do a presentation without my heart rate increasing and all the rest. You know
yeah.
what I mean? I can just do it, and think a
Yeah.
lot of that is learning the art of presentation, of sitting in front of a
Yes.
camera and learning how to speak and avoiding the ums and ahs and all the rest.
Yep.
Of course, editing does help a little bit, and a good script. I always have a script these days. I will write a full
Yeah.
script for an episode. So, a couple of thousand words will last about 13, 14 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's just been an enjoyable experience because I've met and made a lot of friends as a result of this. And
Yeah.
people come, it's bizarre. I mean, this must happen to you all the time, but it's bizarre. People come up
Mm.
to you and say, "Oh, I know you. I went to the Ideal Home Christmas exhibition. I had an experience I
Really?
do not recommend because it was absolutely heaving. That was a couple of weeks ago, and I went with my wife, and I regretted it the moment we got in this massive queue. And there must have been 6 or 7 thousand crazy people in there buying, spending money on all sorts of Christmas related rubbish. And out of the blue, some
Yeah.
guy comes up to me and says, "I know you. You're Big Lee." Yeah,
Wow.
and sort of like, and we ended up having a chat, and it was sort of like you could see the desperation in his eyes. He'd been there for several hours, and like me, he was thinking, "How do I escape?" And
And he
for 5 minutes,
found, by some miracle, he found a fellow
yeah,
wargamer in the
for
middle of
five
it
minutes,
all.
we just talked about our hobby, and everything was right with the world. So, I love that sort of thing. I love
Fantastic.
that about the channel, and it's just I don't want to stop doing it because I do I enjoy it and I
Mm.
enjoy the interactions with gamers. And as going back to something I said earlier, wargamers and the wargaming community online is such a friendly bunch. A lot of social
Mm.
media is full of bile and rubbish, politics. I
Yeah.
mean, I am a political animal, but I try and keep that out of the channel. That's for
Mm.
something else. That's for other locations.
Yeah.
But you go on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, um, and it can be a horrible place. But you come to the wargaming section and that community of people that you're following, and it's a completely different beast.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and overwhelmingly a friendly and convivial one. People want to
Yeah.
share and not just share what they're doing, but share stuff with you and encourage
Yeah.
you. And very rarely get a crossword or a negative comment. You always get a
Yeah.
few, but not much.
Yeah.
So it's just an enjoyable experience. If I weren't enjoying it, I wouldn't be doing it, and I'm not doing it for money.
Yeah.
I'm just doing it because it's a different side of my hobby. A chance for me to share
Yeah.
what I'm doing and to learn from other gamers.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, you said so many interesting things in amongst that. I'll go with the last one first. Sadly, I've deleted Twitter
Mm,
X, call it what we will, from my phone because not because of the wargaming community on Twitter. The wargaming community on Twitter is
mm.
fantastic, and as you know, I've been evangelical about it for a long time. It's all the other stuff that, for whatever reason, I'm just getting bombarded
Mhm.
with. All the nasty things, weirdos, um, adverts just for the most peculiar stuff. Just every other thing now it's not someone else's tweet; it's an
Mm.
advert. And some of the people trying to follow me, or no, thank you. You look at people who's why is Samantha liking my post, and you click, oh no, I didn't want to see that,
Mm,
right? And that's just become, unfortunately, recently, just unbearable.
mm,
If so, I've kept my Twitter account, but I'm only going there via the web now, once, maybe twice a day, just to have a quick check in and, if necessary, make announcements.
mm.
Which is a real shame because I've loved the Twitter community. But the other thing you were saying about, suddenly, in your own tiny way, finding you got a bit of celebrity status, right? In the sense that you'll go, I can remember the first time I was at a war game show, it might be a Salute actually, and someone turned around and said, "Oh, I recognize your voice," right? When I was just doing the podcast, and that was really wow. And then obviously, once you start writing books and that kind of stuff, and you actually have people coming up to you wanting you to sign their books and that kind of thing, that's like, wow, is this really happening? This It's only me, it's not me. I'm not some sort of big celeb or anything, but it's really lovely. But in your case, Lee, truly, you've got my admiration because you've found a format, this little short, pithy format, which is unique. And you do it really, really well. I mean, when you say, you've clearly you do script it, because you do manage to hit that kind of 10 to 15-minute mark every single time, and condense a subject into something short and pithy that, I come away thinking, "Oh, that was really interesting. Yeah, what do I think about that?
mm,
Oh, that's," or a little report or whatever it happens to be. And obviously we had, not so long ago, there was that thing that, you, me, and Alex Sutherland kind of bounced around ourselves about the monetizing your hobby.
mm,
And I think that that was a very obvious example where I thought, not only do I think that's interesting, but I actually think I've got something to say about that, and I've got a platform to say it with. And it was quite interesting the way that, we kind of individually kind of responded in our own ways, to our own kind of standard length of yakking away
mm.
as well. And I think that's one of the other interesting things, that there's a sub community now, isn't there? Not just of wargamers, but of people who talk about wargaming
Mm,
in public. And I think that's a sign of a really healthy hobby.
yeah,
If it can sustain, it's like the fact that the hobby can sustain 3 or 4 or 5, high street publications is
mm.
amazing. And the fact that it's now sustaining all this kind of social media and vidcasting stuff is equally amazing. It's a sign of a really thriving community, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I probably consume more hobby-related stuff through my social media than anything else. I still subscribe to some magazines, but not as many as I used to.
Mm,
Um, and it's just because it's a much more accessible format, I think, sometimes, and that feedback, when it's positive, is really useful. And you say, like you say, that conversation we had about monetizing channels, both you and Alex come up with things that I hadn't thought of and got me thinking a different way about things. So I probably will
mm,
eventually end up monetizing my channel, simply because it's probably not going to make a blind bit of difference to the people that are viewing it. And
yeah,
it might earn me a coffee now and again. Um,
yeah.
so that's perhaps something I will do next year, maybe. But it was very interesting to see your opinions on it, and that's what I really enjoy about when I do a talking point video. Sometimes I know what I'm talking about and I've got a very clear opinion on it. Sometimes I don't really know
Mm,
what I'm talking about, and I'll put out something and ask the viewers, "What's your experience?" And
mm,
I learn so much from talking to other people, and as well as making
yeah,
friends, online. Something we're generally told we're not supposed to do, but yeah, in the wargaming hobby, it's brilliant. Um, I'm
yeah,
learning stuff. I've been a gamer all my life since I was 10, 12 years old, right? But
yeah,
I'm a relatively late, if you like, to historical wargaming, just because of
mm,
fate. It's the way it worked out. So I
yeah,
still feel like I'm behind the curve with lots of people. So there's a lot for me to learn. And I'm loving every minute of it. And the channel, the blog, but now in particular the channel, is just a great way of engaging with people. And everyone that leaves
mm,
comments, the vast majority, 99.99% of them, are extremely positive, very uh, interesting. Everyone's got a really
mm,
good opinion, and I try and respond to as many comments as I can, because that's what it's all about. It's this conversation,
yeah,
and I really genuinely do enjoy it. I look forward to the comments more than the clicks, for want of a better phrase. I
yeah,
might
yeah, yeah,
see a video do well, but I'm more interested in
yeah,
seeing a video get a lot of comments, because it means I'm
yes,
going to have a good conversation.
yeah,
And over the course of the following week, I'll be having that conversation with people, and perhaps picking up some ideas for a future video, subject that
yeah,
people want to discuss. And sometimes,
yeah,
like I say, sometimes I'll have a very clear idea of what I want to talk about. So when I did a video of not so long ago about display games at shows, and the
mm,
information that goes with them, I'm very clear, very opinionated about how these games should be presented and what information should be available for people.
mm,
Um, doesn't mean I'm right, but I've got a very clear opinion on that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, but other times, like I say, other times I'll pick a subject that I'm really not sure about, but I'll put it out there because I know I'm going to have a really interesting conversation after the video and learn a lot.
yeah,
Um, if the video does well and gets lots of, lots of hits and lots of subscriptions,
mm,
fantastic. But that's not the end. That's not the reason I'm doing it. Um,
mm,
I am obsessed a bit by the stats. It has to be said, but I don't know if I'm learning
mm,
anything particularly from that, other than at least people are watching what I'm putting out there. So, and I'm
yeah,
enjoying it. And while I'm enjoying it, I'll keep
yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that what you're engaging with is the social part of social
Yeah.
media. Because I'm with you, because I can remember certainly when I was first, because I designed God, hundreds of websites in my time. I was a web designer, and back in the days when everyone was obsessed by the stats, because no one had ever seen anything like this before. It's like, wow, I can see that today 300 people came and visited my site. Oh, and they came from Peru and Spain and France and Uruguay, and we were all just like, wow, it really is the world wide web and all that kind of stuff. And then, as you say, you can get certain things where, but sometimes it seems inexplicable. You think, well, I just chucked that out, but it got 1,000 hits, whereas I really worked hard on this thing and it's had 52 hits. What's going on?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same running the Patreon. I mean, I have to say, Patreon, the statistics they give you are frankly a bit rubbish compared to stats on other things on the web. But still, you can really work hard on something and you put it out there and it gets like 3 likes, out of 200 odd patrons. It's like, so does that, what, the other 197 people hated it or
Mm,
couldn't be bothered? It's very weird that sometimes you expect something to get a lot of engagement, but it doesn't get a lot of
mm,
engagement. So what's lovely, as you say, Lee, is when someone actually leaves a comment that you can respond to and then engage with. That's just fantastic. Yes, that's what I want.
mm.
That's, I'm doing this for you people out there. So
Mm.
please tell me what you think
It's
about it.
why I like the YouTube now. It's the way to go for me rather than the blog. I mean, I'm keeping the blog because I post my videos onto there, and I still get a lot of people come
Mm,
to the YouTube video via the post that I put on my blog. But I get far, far more comments on YouTube, and it must just be
yes.
the nature of the medium. Um, but
Yeah.
that means the conversation is much more vibrant on YouTube when I put out compared to writing the same sort of article on my blog. Might get
Yeah.
one or two comments, but I might
Yeah.
get 50 or 60 comments or more sometimes for a
Yeah.
video that I've done. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just it's the conversation. I've always
Yeah.
enjoyed that about, like you say, social media. I love social media and I hate social media in equal measure. But I
Yeah.
do love
Yeah.
the wargaming community on social media because you
Yeah.
can have some fantastic conversations, learn incredible stuff, take you down different rabbit holes, and find new products. And just
Mm,
it's a brilliant resource. You can't be everywhere on social media all the time, so you have to pick your battlefield.
yeah.
So thank you very much for the referral to Blue Sky because I'm loving that. As an
Cool.
alternative to the other one, the other place. Um,
Yeah.
I do find that the Bond villain wannabe in charge of X is annoying the crap out of me most of the
Yeah.
time, and
Yeah.
the changes
Yeah.
there are just not fun. Uh, but
Yeah.
that's social media. It's always been a bit of a mixed bag, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But when you go within
Yeah.
the wargaming community, the people that are sharing and are putting themselves out to have a conversation, the vast majority of it is very, very positive. Um,
Yes.
and that's a really affirming side of the hobby that I've always really enjoyed. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely. Uh, what I was going to say was, because we're sort of heading towards the end of our time now.
mm,
We've talked a lot about the stuff you put out and how you engage with the public, and it's fantastic. And you're doing an amazing job, Lee. I think
thank you.
that needs to go on the record. You're doing a brilliant job. I have to say, a highly professional job, actually. And it's really interesting the way that you say, describe how that's fed back into your other life, that by doing this kind of thing, it's improved your ability to communicate if you know, helps you to overcome imposter syndrome, that kind of thing, or
Mm,
get overcome nerves about addressing, you know, large numbers of people on the spot. Because I certainly know that that's something that I've found over time is that you just you get used to just taking that risk of putting yourself out there. And the fact is 99.9% of the time people, if they say anything at all, they say nice things.
mm.
It's very rare, as you say, that someone will come on and, you know, expletive, very rare. I have had one or two nutters in the time, but that's a different story. But but what I wanted to talk about now, Lee, I mean, obviously, you talked about your journey that started with the, you know, the plastic soldiers on the carpet, and then your role playing and your Warhammer fantasy, and you've done your sci-fi stuff, and you've done your amazing world building, and you know, you got Stuart in his shed and all the rest of it, and the all that stuff going on. But tell the people about what do you like doing? What does your hobby consist of on a kind of day-to-day basis? What kind of, I mean, I know you've got into kind of 6 mil gaming, that kind
Mm.
of stuff. Uh, is it just that? Are you doing other stuff as well? I know you enjoy painting, and I can see a huge rack of Vallejo paints behind you. Tell us about, you know, if left to your own devices, okay, you've got nothing else on the calendar, you're just going to do some hobby for yourself. What does that actually consist of, Lee?
So most of my stuff is 6 mil. Um, I do have some 15 mil. I don't do a lot of 28 or other larger scales other than role playing stuff, um,
Mm,
simply because I ain't got the space. And I do love 6 mil. I love big battles. I love big units. Uh,
mm.
play a bit of To the Strongest. I've been getting into Test of Resolve, so for the Wars of the Roses. Um,
All right.
so that was one of my big project last year, was painting up the all of the units for the Battle of Bosworth. And as usual, I went
Wow.
overboard. These units,
Heraldry and 6 mil.
yeah, with flags on everything. Every base had to have a flag, so it was a bit insane.
Oh, wow.
Um, uh, and I mean, this year, as I think we've already mentioned, I'm taking part in the Analog Hobbies Painting Challenge. So I do
Oh,
that every
yes.
year. And this year, I'm not going to be painting an army, but I have in the past painted Anglo Zulu War. Um, so many Zulus, it was insane. Um, I've done all my French Foreign Legion stuff. I do like colonial stuff. I have to say, it's very interesting because it's a sort of,
Mm,
I'm usually rooting for the underdog. um,
yeah.
uh, and so whatever it's whatever fancy takes me fancy. So I do like ancients. I really enjoy in the Wars of the Roses stuff, but I've done more modern stuff as well. Got a vast collection of Second World War 6 mil stuff for the Desert War. Um, uh, I really enjoy Chain of Command, so I do that in 15 mil rather than 28 mil.
All right.
Um, because I've got a small table here in my
Right.
operations room, so it's not a full size table. So 15 mil works quite fine.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of solo gaming. Not as
Yeah.
much as I ought to, it has to be said, because I tend to get caught up in other things. And I'm definitely going to.
Yeah.
It's one of my New Year's resolutions. I'm going to do more solo games next year because I have only done a few this
Oh,
year.
okay.
Um, Partly, there's two prongs to that. Is one, I enjoy playing solo, but also I can video them and put them on my blog, on my channel. So,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, painting. I love painting. Uh, I've no big projects at the moment. It's lots of bits and bobs for previous projects. There's models that were left over from previous projects that I never got to finish. So I'm doing a load of civilians, for instance, for the Foreign Legion period.
Mm.
Um,
All
um,
right.
uh, some irregular units and things like that, and
Mm.
I like making terrain. So I'm making some forests at the moment.
Oh, lovely. Look at that,
Yeah,
folks.
I've been making a few of these. These ones are fixed, but I'm going to do a set where the trees come off.
Removable canopy.
This is for me 6 mil stuff. So the Wars of the Roses, because the particular rule set I'm using, that units can't go through the woods. But yeah,
Right.
just throwing some bits together and figuring out how to make something. I just like that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm more than happy to be just tinkering away and figuring stuff out and getting in a complete mess. Um, I have to have a regular Hoover in here about once a week because I'm finding pieces of metal and bits of wood and all sorts of stuff all over the room.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
never happier than when I'm covered in paint. So, if I wasn't making videos all the time, I'd probably get more painted. But that's why I love the creativity of this hobby because it's so varied, and
Mm,
you can go anywhere you want, and no one's judging you, because your hobby is different
yeah,
from their hobby. Um, you
yeah.
know, um, and you never know what the next show might bring. You'll see a game that really inspires you. I love
Yeah,
Partisan and
yeah.
some of the smaller shows in Kent that our group goes to on a regular basis. Just you see some great games, fantastic models,
Mm,
periods you've not seen before, or a new range of miniatures, and you go, "I
yeah.
want some of that." And then next thing you know, you're off down that rabbit hole and
Yeah, yeah,
money.
it's
And
dangerous.
I'm not one of these people who've got like I haven't spent 30 years collecting Napoleonics, for instance. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what makes you happy,
Yeah.
that's all that counts. I am a bit of a butterfly. I do tend to flip between different periods, um,
Mm,
but I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I'm finally, after many years only doing fantasy stuff, I'm doing historicals and I'm exploring different periods I'm interested in. I like playing and focusing on turning points in history. Um, those moments
right.
where if the battle had gone a different way, what would the impact have been? Um,
Yeah.
um, like I say, at the moment, I've been I've been preparing and painting for the Battle of Bosworth, and it's one of those battles where, well, if it'd gone the other way, what would have happened? You know, um,
Yeah, yeah,
Without the
yeah.
Tudor propaganda machine to go into full flow afterwards, how would British history have looked? So I like those
Mm,
turning points, and just and particularly the Bosworth one. Obviously, I've got the latest archaeological evidence that says where the battle actually took place
yeah.
and those sort of maps. But I've also got a dozen older maps that are all completely wrong. But you know what? I can do a version of Bosworth on those as well. So you can play the same models, the same battle, but in a different way, a dozen different times.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of solo gaming doing that in here this year, and at some point, I'm going to take the bigger game to the shed of war and get it out on a bigger table for the guys. Now,
Fantastic.
once I think I'm confident enough with the rules, that is.
It's really interesting what you're saying about solo gaming. I mean, I think you and I could chat a lot about that. Are there particular rule sets that you use for solo gaming, or do you just have a particular way that you have found to make solo gaming work for you? I mean, are you someone who's dug out the old Don Featherstone books on solo wargaming? Have you written up your own systems for effectively giving the enemy artificial intelligence, or do you just move from side to side and just play each side in turn? How
Well,
do you go about
I
that?
love the Men Who Would Be Kings, and of course they've got the Mr. Babbage rules in there for automating the opposition.
Mm,
Um, but I've used the Men Who Would Be Kings for 6 mil gaming. So I did a solo played Rorke's Drift, um,
mm,
um, and had to make loads of changes to make the rules work. But somehow I managed to get a game that was semi-automated, um, and played out fairly historically accurate as well. It took me several days to play, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. And that was like
brilliant.
a, a a career moment, if you like, something like I've been wanting to do for years, and I finally got to do it because I
Yeah,
could do it in 6 mil. Um, but yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I have just the usual set of um, methods for automating the enemy, whether that is a charts to say right under these conditions they'll do such and such, or um, roll a dice, the simplest method of all.
mm,
Roll a dice,
yeah,
50-50 chance they're going to do this or they do that,
yeah,
and you have to respond to that. I don't necessarily pick a set of rules because there's a solo version. I will find a way of making it work. Whether it's
right,
perfect or not, it doesn't really matter. I get to play with my toys on the table.
yeah,
And then at
yeah,
some point, I will be playing that game properly or I'll umpire it. Because I find the main advantage for me for solo wargaming is the opportunity to play a set of rules and learn them properly before you sit
mm,
in front of a group of other players and umpire a game and then make a complete
mm,
tit it out of yourself because you've said something wrong or you've interpreted the rules wrong.
Yeah,
I've solo played it and I know what I'm talking about. Doesn't mean to say I
yeah,
don't occasionally have a blank moment where I go, I've forgotten everything.
yeah, yeah. Senior moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, solo playing is just a great way of learning a set of rules, learning the nuances of them. I mean, like for instance, the test of resolve rules. I was thinking about something the other day, and I got the rule book out, and I read thing, and I thought I've just read that rule completely wrong for the last year that I've had this set of rules, and I've just
Mm,
reread it, and it's ambiguous because there's no clarity in that particular part of the rules, and it was all to do with movement of whole battles as opposed to individual companies. And I thought you could read that rule one of two ways, and actually maybe I've
mm.
been doing it wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Like one of those optical illusion things where once you've seen it one way, you can't see it the other way.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
and it's interesting because basically, without going into too much detail, I was rolling for each individual company to see how far they could move. But it sounds like the way the rules written, you could read it that actually you make one roll for the whole battle and they all move together, which to me makes more sense for the period that they would move as a mass.
Yeah,
Um, I could be wrong, but do you know what? It's given me something to think about, and I may make a little house
yeah, yeah,
rule that says, "No, this is the way you're going to interpret this rule." And like I say, part of my video for next weekend is about clarity in rules. You know, if you've got an umpire who can make those decisions for you, great. But if you're not, if you're down the club and there's just two of you across the table, you can end up having a Barney unless you've got some amicable way of sorting it out. Mm.
absolutely. And as I said, as someone who's just published a rule set, I am just dreading the correspondence that, in spite of 10 years of being used by all these people and running a Facebook group for it and all the rest of it, of course, if it gets into the hands of someone who've never seen them before, they you just have to accept that. I suppose if you want to, you could read it like that. Yes. So
The surest way to break
this
a
is where.
set of rules is to let wargamers get their hands on it. Innit?
But the thing is, why worry? They're going to tinker with them
Yeah.
anyway, Lee. This is the thing. The number of people who are actually going to play them as written is going to be minuscule.
I'm
I know this.
I'm notorious for doing it. I will get a set of rules that work
Oh,
perfectly fine, and then I'll make alterations to it, for usually
yeah,
for solo play or whatever. But you know, I think
yeah,
actually I don't like the way that rule works. I'll change that slightly. And I've
yeah,
tried to write a set of rules, and I can't. But I'm good at. Well, I say good. I like to tinker with sets of rules. Whether I'm making improvements or not is a matter of judgment. Um, there are better rules writers within Postie's Rejects, to be sure. And so Richard has produced a couple of cracking sets of rules for French Revolutionary War, for instance. And well, at some point we were going to try and talk him into publishing them because they're really good. I couldn't do that, but I do like to tinker with a set of rules, as do probably every wargamer. I imagine is like that. They tinker with a set of rules or the way that they base a set of miniatures. Oh, we're not going to do it the way the book says. I'll do it my way, or that's part
yeah.
of the fun of it. It's just exploring the options. Trying to find the right set of rules that play the way you want them to. Well, don't worry about it too much. Find something that's nearly there and change it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anyway, Lee, my dear fella, we've been yakking for a couple of hours. Viewers will notice I've had to make a couple of cuts in this video because we've encountered some technical problems in the vast distance between Hove and Dagenham, uh, intergalactic space and all that. But hopefully it will come out together in the wash. But Lee, I am delighted you were able to come on the show at long last. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating, mate. You're going to be coming back on the show. I think we've got plenty more to talk about,
Well, thank you for having me.
and already, well, you're extremely welcome. There's things there that I think this is, yeah, what you're doing. I really admire, and you're coming up with a lot of things that are making me think about my hobby, which is terrific. The fact that you're going through this process of thinking about your hobby and and just putting this thing out there. First of all, that's quite brave of you. So congratulations and well done. And second, it's like that's a really interesting way of going about things. And yeah, plenty for me to think about as well. Plus, folks, the backlog. I mean, I'll put the links obviously in the show notes. Is Miniature Adventures YouTube channel. There's a huge backlog of stuff for you to go and watch. And how many hundreds, thousands of blog posts? So
Probably, I've lost count. I mean, I've been doing it since 2009. I don't do daily posts anymore on the blog, but usually at least 1 or 2 a week. So yeah, there's a lot
there's
of
a
talk.
few hundred,
I mean, it's
that's
a
for
great
sure.
resource for a YouTuber because when I think I really don't know what to talk about this week, so I go back and look at stuff I wrote a few years
Yeah,
ago on my channel. Oh, well, I'll use that.
yeah, absolutely. It's forever fresh. Anyway, Lee, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we will bump into each other, I'm sure, at Cavalier or
Mhm.
Partisan or something like that again. And I'll have to come. You're not that far away in Dagenham. I'll have you
Exactly.
come
I
down the
was
road and
chatting to the lads earlier, and we're going to open invitation to come to the Shed of War and see our crazy play in the gigantic shed. We'll get put Stuart to put something fun on and get you to
oh, that'd be
join
brilliant.
in.
I'd love that. I'd love that, and I have to get you come down to the Luftwaffe and play some Imaginations
Well, it's a
madness with
guaranteed
me.
win for you because I'm a terrible war gamer.
So I gather. Let's get it in the diary, folks. Brilliantly. Thanks ever so much, mate. Take care.
That's it. Thank you.